interview, he admitted and said to himself, you know something, this is the kind of stuff that can get you in a lot of trouble. And I'm like, now keep in mind now, I'm in my 20s.
Just like these conversations.
No, exactly.
No. Oh, he tried it.
Hey, yo, mic check, 1 2 1 2. What's going on with y'all, man? What's happening? If you've been rocking with me, welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome. It's your dread-headed host with yet another dose, keeping you engrossed from coast to coast. That's right. So today, I want to talk about, if you haven't heard about this, Nick Cannon has been in the news lately. So I want to kind of break down him and his recent, let's say, entanglements with Viacom, the Jewish community, and the larger white population at large. The reason that Nick got in trouble is because he sat down with Professor Griff, who is a former member of the group Public Enemy, if you don't know, and they got to talking about a whole bunch of things. Listen, the podcast episode's like an hour and 45 minutes long. It really wouldn't do it justice to say they sat down and talked about one specific thing, but in general, you could say they got down and sat down and talked about race. What Nick Cannon should have done, which is what all of his white counterparts would have learned in entertainment, is that if you're going to talk about something that may be misconstrued as potentially offensive or something to another group or race or culture, you got to bring somebody in from the culture to hold you down, like Shane Dawson did when he did blackface and brought in that one girl to sit next to him and not say anything for X amount of time.
Oh, nigga, bitch, monkey woman, you're the best!
Or when Tarantino reminds you that Samuel L. Jackson is in his movies before going on to use the N-word an absurd amount of times, claiming that, well, that's just how it would have been in this universe, coming out of my head, Quentin Tarantino.
Did you notice a sign in the front of my house that said dead nigger storage?
Or even like when, say, Vice President Joe Biden reminds you that he works with Obama, so as to go on to excuse some more of the, let's say, charitably racially insensitive things, such as,
if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
That's right, Joe. I'm on your head. Keep it locked. In any case, Nick Cannon got in trouble. And before we go any further, I'd like to just say now that the views expressed on this podcast do entirely reflect the views of Dion Talks, because this is my shit and I own it. So I don't have to apologize or nothing for nobody. More to the point, I don't hate anyone, and I'm not trying to be hateful with this conversation. And unlike Nick Cannon, I like to think that I've chosen my words a little more carefully, so as not to be misconstrued as such. But real talk, no hate here, no love lost. Let's get to the conversation. So there are two clips specifically that are circulating in the media, and two reasons why Nick Cannon came to heel at the feet of Viacom and the community, right? The one clip was described as being anti-Semitic, all right? And then there was another clip that was described as being bigoted or racist against white people in some of the words and language that he was using. First, with the anti-Semitic clip, people say that it is wrong because he is using language here that's perpetuating a stereotype that Jewish people own and control everything, all right? And people say that because he's perpetuating that stereotype with the language that he's using by mentioning the Rothschilds, while he goes on to describe people in control of, you know, wealth and that this is dangerous rhetoric, and it is anti-Semitic because it is incorrect and dangerous and shouldn't be spouted. Now, here's the thing about that. What they really mean when they say that this language is problematic is because if you look at the history, this type of language and this idea, the stereotype that Jewish people own and control this and are responsible for your woes and this and that, that's the same type of nonsense propaganda that the Nazis used to then take and incarcerate them during World War II, right? We know for a fact that this is the language that led to the horrific actions that were taken against the community then. So it's understandable when you look at it under that lens to say, okay, any rhetoric like that is dangerous and we're going to nip that in the bud immediately. We're not going to have that, you know, because of what is historically done. It is hurtful language historically for a group of people. And I would concede that, and I think anyone with any type of compassion would concede that. Bad stereotypes, no matter against who, are problematic. I can't eat chicken around white people without feeling self-conscious about it, as if there's something wrong with me for liking fried chicken. Fried chicken is delicious. I know you like fried chicken sitting there at home too. And if you're a vegan, I don't know what to tell you. You're missing out. Bottom line is, stereotypes and generalizations made against the people that are used to perpetuate negative things and then put people in a box and then eventually have negative consequences against those people, right, are bad, and we should be wary of them, and we should not make it a point to continue keeping up that type of rhetoric and conversation. With this was a continuation of this little clip that they clipped out, this little couple of seconds. This was a continuation of a conversation, a part of the conversation he was having earlier with Professor Griff, when he was describing his own experiences when he had sat down and had this conversation with a friend of his, did the interview that infamously ended up getting him kicked out of Public Enemy and effectively canceled for anti-Semitic comments. It's really ironic that they had this conversation, these revelations, and he goes back and describes his experiences, which is almost a play-by-play recreation in Nick Cannon's case. If you go back and look at even the timeline, it's insane. But in that talk, Professor Griff goes on and he's talking about how at the time when he was having that conversation, when they were talking about the entertainment, the music industry specifically, he named out these 6 families, these 6 names of people who had owned and controlled the industry at the time. Now, I don't know who owns and controls the industry, and I haven't looked up the list, so I'm not going to start naming names and making generalizations, okay? But in Professor Griff, what he was saying is, here are the names. Here are the receipts. You can go and see he who names on this building, who names on this contract. And he had named a couple of names there. So Nick Cannon comes in later on and he picks back up and says the Rothschilds and them and keeps it moving. That's more of a colloquialism, to say so-and-so and them, my cousins and them, or my friends and them, or whatever. That's just to describe, and that's just more of a placeholder language, and etc., if you will. There was no need to go back and relist the names because they'd already listed the names from before. Again, could this language be looked at as dangerous? Absolutely, if it's not contextualized in the right way. I believe here, the media should take some responsibility on how they contextualize the clip, because it really comes off as more insensitive than I believe they meant it all to be in the context of the conversation. If you actually go and watch the whole podcast, which I encourage you to do, I'll leave a link. I think Nick actually took the podcast down, but somebody is doing God's work and they put another link, a mirror up to the podcast on YouTube. So assuming that that's still up and you're still curious about it, check down in the link below. Now, the second clip that got Nick into trouble was the clip that people said that he was making racist comments towards white people. Okay, in the clip that they use, he is describing the power of melanin and saying that melanin is what gives people compassion, and that, and then by that definition, the white people who have no melanin or lack of melanin in their skin would have less compassion. Okay, what they don't show you in the clip that they run through the media is that he mentions in explaining all of this, he references Dr. Frances C. Welsing. If you don't know who Dr. Frances C. Welsing is, she was is an American psychiatrist. All right, she has a number of accolades in that. She's also the author of the ISIS papers, all right, Keys to Color. If you're not familiar with that, one of the main principles, one of the core tenets of that paper is that she believed that the genocide of people of color is caused by white people's inability to produce melanin, right? So Nick Cannon references her and her works and then goes on to talk about this, right? So in this conversation that they're having, this is the reference that he's using. It's not like Nick Cannon said these words and said this is truth and this is what's coming out of his mouth and he's just setting it up as wholly right. He's just saying he referenced that, and it's really said in passing. So, to Nick, I would say perhaps if you're having these conversations, if you're going to be citing sources to use as references during conversation, especially when you're having conversations that can be considered inflammatory, perhaps be a little bit more clear in your diction when you're pointing out who it is you're talking about. Because he even brings this whole conversation back to Farrakhan. And we, as you know, there's a lot of things about Farrakhan. He's been in the news about being hateful and racist and things, that and the other, So you bring up these hot button people, you really have to be mindful about how you go about having the conversation. In terms of Dr. Welsing, I haven't read the ISIS papers myself. I'm not going to pretend like I have. All right, I have a vague familiarity with them based on what I've known, my own experience. But that connection and how that has to the Nation of Islam and all of that. That being said, another part of her paper that she has is about how homosexuality and bisexuality is just a ploy by the white man to reduce the black man's population, which is ridiculous. This whole idea, and I'm a sidetrack here for a second, that this gayness is a ploy by white people to reduce the black population is ridiculous. It's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. This is problematic rhetoric, as you would put it, and I'm gonna explain to you why. Just really simple here, because people have been gay or homosexual or bisexual, whatever, for the longest time before the system of racism as we know it, especially here in the States, was even set up. Miss me with that nonsense. There are even people in the community today, people who I would say would be leaders in the community today, intelligent brothers and sisters in the community today who still believe and act along those lines. They say they go on to claim that they're not bigoted in that, but I would encourage those people to understand that that type of rhetoric can be construed as hurtful to a people, especially when you consider that people are literally being slaughtered because of their sexual orientation in some places. So maybe check it, turn it down a little bit, consider the words that are coming out of your mouth. All that being said, I'm not out here to discredit Dr. Welding or any of these people, because she has all these accolades, she has these degrees, she comes from a family of doctors. So to say that just because there's one thing in her papers that I disagree with, the whole thing's gotta go, it doesn't make any sense. There has to be room for conversation if there's going to be any growth. What's funny about this whole thing with Nick Cannon and how this is approached, especially by the Jewish community, is when he goes on and gets canceled inevitably by Viacom. They go and they say, we're taking the show out from you, and all of that and all of those things. He at first gets up and he says, he puffs out his chest. He takes responsibility for his actions. He acknowledges that his words could have been construed as that. Again, what she has said 1,000 times in the podcast, if they bothered to show it, he did not mean anything to be hateful, and he was encouraging people to come in and educate and converse so we can get to a place of better understanding, right? After that, and eventually they kill him again. They say, that wasn't a real apology. You didn't prostrate before us. And so, they probably threatened to take away the Fox show. He got on and apologized a second time. More sorries and tears and Becky tears and that. He got to keep his little Fox show. Hey, look, you got a livelihood to keep. I understand, multi-million-dollar bills ain't nothing to play with if you don't have that multi-million-dollar paycheck. That being said, Nick, and this is just an aside, you can turn around and be surprised when you puff out your chest and pretend to be a symbol of pride and power, and then within an hour you flip back and renege on all of that. I mean, you've lost support, and there's really if you stand for something or fall for anything. All that being said, Nick then proceeds to bring on Rabbi Abraham Cooper to his podcast, Cannon's Class, where this all took place. He still has a podcast because that's his, he owns that, right? And he had the conversation with the rabbi. They chop it up, they get into it. The rabbi provides his perspectives. I haven't watched the full podcast on that. I'll link down to that below if you want to go check that out. But they have the conversation, they get educated in that. What's funny about how that all took place, right, is that in the rabbi's case, in the Jewish community's case, right, and I don't want to generalize here, so I'm going to just say the rabbi's case because I only know about the rabbi. In the rabbi's case, he would not ever condescend to sit down with people like Minister Farrakhan to have this kind of discourse because they've just completely labeled them, and they're like, we're not going to do that, and you're problematic, and none of that. Meanwhile, on that same tip, the rabbi forced Nick Cannon to apologize to him for the word that he said, before he would even agree to sit down. On that same tip, Farrakhan is always willing to sit down and have the conversation. Now, again, I've already pointed out parts of the doctrines that they follow that I don't agree with, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm an expert on the subject for either the rabbi or Farrakhan. I'll leave that to them. All that being said, when Nick Cannon, talks about this melanin and how that might lead to compassion, and then you look at situations like this where on Farrakhan's end, he's willing to sit down, forgive him, even though these people have dragged his name through the mud repeatedly on the media over the years, blocked him out. You know, you look at situations like the brother of Botham Jean in the Amber Geiger case, where he forgave her for murdering his brother in his own home while eating ice cream. You look at the congregation, all right, that was run through in South Carolina by that monster Dylan Roof, all right? They still, after all of that said, we forgive him in that. If we're just looking at anecdotal evidence, melanin and compassion may not be linked. All jokes aside, the idea that people without melanin, the white people, don't have compassion is absolutely ridiculous. I've met some of the most compassionate people in my life, and yes, they have been less melanated than me, okay? So that type of generalization, again, you know, there is always going to be parts of it where might have been seated in truth, parts of a rhetoric or a position that you can analyze and say, okay, well, where is this coming from? Why do they believe that? What evidence are they using to back it up? And that's what I want. That's the kind of conversation I'm here for. Let's look at the facts. Let's look and see if you can back it up. If you can't back it up, nonsense, get out of here, all right? But if there's some type of trend or facts, it's worth at least sitting down to have the conversation. No? At least in my opinion. So, I want to switch gears here for a second and talk about Static Shock. For those of you not familiar, Static Shock is a superhero cartoon that aired in the early 2000s that followed the adventures of teenager Virgil Hawkins, aka Static. Now, without going into the detail about the plot of the show, one of the reasons the show was so acclaimed by fans and critics was because of the way it dealt with heavy social issues such as gun violence, as seen in the season 2 finale titled Jimmy, and racism, as seen in the season 1 episode titled Sons of the Fathers. In the latter episode, we see Virgil finding out that his best friend's father is a bigoted racist after overhearing comments he makes after they have dinner. When a rift forms in their friendship, Virgil's best friend Richie takes off into the night, leading Richie's father, seeking the help of Virgil's father to track down his lost son. Over the course of their search, the two have a conversation in which Virgil's father points out the errors in Richie's father's viewpoints about people of color and how his intolerance has led to the alienation of his son, who did not share his negative perceptions and was thriving in a healthy relationship with someone that he would consider to be less than. After some searching, the two are able to finally locate Richie, and with Static's help, they're able to get him to safety. Through this experience, we see that Richie's father forced to reevaluate his previously held negative views of black people in the face of this contradictory experience. Now, the cartoon takes heavy influence from the original Static comic book, written by Dwayne McDuffie. During one story arc in particular, the book deals with a similar topic to our discussion on Nick Cannon. In issues 5, 6, and 7, we see Static dealing with race riots that have erupted in the fictional city of Dakota between the African American community and the Jewish community in the aftermath of a bombing that took place at a synagogue. These bombings are part of a campaign by the villain Commando X, a radicalized black terrorist who has been spewing hateful rhetoric against the Jewish people in favor of black supremacy. In his superhero persona, Static has to deal with protecting the citizens from the bombings while trying to track down and capture Commando X. Meanwhile, as Virgil, he has a conversation with a group of friends regarding the recent bombings and the various teachings spouted by Commando X. One of Virgil's friends, who is black, makes an offhanded remark about Jewish people being in control of the media, which Virgil supports by adding that now they have worked hard and amassed power and influence, the Jewish community should then share the wealth with the less fortunate. In the face of all this, Virgil's friend Frida, who is of Jewish descent, takes offense to the comments, calling them nothing more than a conspiracy theory. The next issue sees Frida and another one of Virgil's friends sitting him down and flipping the conversation on him by asserting that black people had amassed control over music and professional sports and should share the wealth. Initially, Virgil takes offense to this and begins to go on the defensive, listing reasons to debunk the theory before realizing that the point his friends were trying to make. What's so great about this story is that at no point does the group stop being friends. As they seek to educate each other and form a better understanding of the other's viewpoints, they never cast aside these long-held bonds at the first sign of a disagreement. In the third issue, we see both Virgil and Frida sitting down with their parents, who provide another lens shaped by the wisdom that comes from life experience. In both conversations, we see the parents contextualizing these types of comments and rhetoric, conceding that there are some truths mixed in with this kind of inflammatory rhetoric and empathizing with the viewpoints and feelings of those from the other side, while simultaneously identifying and condemning the problematic elements of these talking points. Frida's father recognizes that while Jewish people are still persecuted for their religion, they have had some insulation when it came to integrating into American society based on the color of their skin, whereas black people can never delude themselves in that way, which he says forces them to be genuinely themselves in a way that Jewish people don't necessarily have to. Virgil's father acknowledges that Jewish people have been allowed to integrate into society in a way that black people had not, which can be a point of envy on the part of the black community. However, he correctly points out that even in their neighborhood, there has been vicious discrimination against Jewish people, and that no form of discrimination, be it for the better of a community or otherwise, is acceptable. In the end, with a better understanding of the other's feelings and standpoints, Virgil and Frida get on the phone and reconcile with each other, having come to a better place of understanding. Truth be told, you would never see a story like this in today's comics, because it likely would have been canceled after the first issue when the snowflakes got triggered by the harsh language. At the very least, I would not expect the writers to be able to handle a topic of this depth nearly as deftly as McDuffie did in his stories without being heavy-handed and preachy. But the reason I bring this up is because 1, the Static comic book by Dwayne McDuffie is amazing, and I highly recommend you check it out if you're a fan of the comics, even if you aren't familiar with the character. 2, to highlight an original black character that is currently owned by DC, that has a proven history of success across multiple mediums, who is just asking for a live-action movie adaptation. I know y'all want that Black Panther money. And 3, because so many of these lessons in this book can be applied to the discussion around Nick Cannon and the comments that he's made. At the end of the day, there has to be room for conversation if we're going to grow and learn. If someone says something that's problematic and it is clear, which I would assert in my opinion, it was clear in Nick Cannon's case he did not mean to be offensive, there should be room to have this conversation before everyone throws him under the bus. There should be room to have a conversation about why people feel the way they do and where this rhetoric and these ideas may have stemmed from. Is there historical precedent? Is there anecdotal precedent? Why are these opinions the way that they are? And if they're wrong, why are they wrong? And how can we come to a better place of understanding instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater? But hey, if you've been rocking with me for this long, I thank you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, put a like on that video. If you liked it, share this out to your friends. Hey, this was a little bit of a longer one. This has much room for conversation. Keep it clean down there. I know people are gonna get triggered. Again, there's no hate in my heart for anyone. And if I did offend anyone with anything that I said, please tell me down in the comments what I said and how I got you fucked up. And hopefully we can come to a better place of understanding. But with that, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
The word of the day is nigga.